Let me start by introducing myself. I'm not a particularly talented or skilled individual. You could say that I'm below average intelligence and possess a permanent lethargic disposition. Not having been blessed with any marketable traits forced me to go down an unsavory path in life. I'm not proud of my current form of employment, if you can even really call petty crime such a thing. Having never been a firm believer in karma, crime just appeared to be a natural career choice for me. I wish I could tell you that I found my calling in this unconventional occupation, but I'm just your common street thief. Whether it's snatching purses from frail old ladies or breaking into parked cars for loose change, nothing was beneath me. I never thought what I was doing was wrong until I embarked on this new venture. I was watching YouTube videos and stumbled upon this one of a man stealing a phone from an unsuspecting woman on a subway train. The scheme seemed quite clever and utilised exact timing with the train's departure. The man on the train picked out someone next to the doors and waited for the train to stop. He then readied himself for the attack, like a lion hidden in the bushes. As soon as the doors began to close, he pounced on his prey, grabbing the phone and slipping through the narrowing passageway of the sliding doors. By the time the woman even had a chance to realise what had just occurred, the man is long gone, and the train is already in motion. Phones these days are pretty expensive gadgets, but that wasn't what drew me to it. What I liked about the video and what made me want to attempt this was the slick image of the thief. The precise timing, the swift maneuvers, and the satisfying getaway. All of this made me feel like this was a respectable trick. In my mind it was cunning and skillful. It was something to brag about, and I needed something to be proud of so badly. So there I was on the train, scoping out the cabin and drawing a mental cap of where everyone was. I felt like a secret agent on a thrilling mission to recover what could have been classified government data. I made sure to dress appropriately and not in the rags I usually left my apartment in. I was disguised as an average citizen with a proper job and therefore no need to steal. No one would suspect that a man in a nice pair of khakis and a handsome cardigan would run off with their phone. In hindsight, it was all pretty stupid that I went to such lengths, and to this day I'm still embarrassed by it, or would be if not for what happened afterwards. I saw my target. He was a middle-aged man with distinguished-looking grey streaks in his hair. Judging by his expensive suit and fancy-looking laptop bag, he probably wouldn't have missed his iPhone all that much anyway. He sat directly next to the door with his head leaning against the glass divider. There must have been something really captivating on his phone, because he hadn't looked away since I first laid eyes on him. The more distracted he was, the better it would be for me, so I didn't really give it another thought. I positioned myself on the other side of that divider right in front of the doors. The sound of the scraping steel echoed through the cabin as the train started braking. I stumbled a bit as I was forced forward by the slowing train. I went down a never-ending checklist of safeguards and countermeasures as the train stood motionless for an agonizing minute. Then, like an air raid siren, I heard the ding which indicated the doors were about to close. His face was still glued to his phone. I told myself, I am the lion, and he's my prey, and reached out as swiftly as I could, like an eagle scooping up a salmon. I clawed the man's phone and ripped it from his pale, clammy hands. The next thing I knew, I had dashed across the platform, but as I turned my head to look back, I saw at the corner of my eye an image that still haunts me today. At the time, I couldn't believe it, but he was standing there staring at me through the window of the now closed train door, and he had the biggest grin I've ever seen. I thought he was going to pry the doors open and chase me down as the train remained stationary. Much to my surprise, he just continued to stare and smile. Eventually I reached the stairs, and as I'd leaped up onto them, the train and the man was no longer in view. Hopping up the stairs, I quickly found myself in the middle of a busy street. Hundreds of people were making their way home from work at the time, and felt inclined to do the same. The whole way back, I kept thinking about the smiling man. It didn't make any sense. Why he reacted like that? Was he smiling because this was some kind of police sting operation? Am I being traced through the phone? I reached into my pocket and retrieved the device. It was pristine and well looked after, maybe even brand new. This was a good find, certainly a great success for my first attempt. I powered the phone off out of paranoia and told myself that if this was a trap, I would have been apprehended already. I didn't truly feel safe until I was inside my apartment again. Every lock and latch I secured released waves of relief in me. All the panic and jitters became excitement as I placed my bounty on the coffee table. I felt the need to celebrate, so I opened the freezer and reviewed my collection of frozen pizzas. I decided to spoil myself and opted for the meat lover's pizza. After heating it in my microwave, I quickly chowed down on my prized pizza and chased it with a beer. I always thought it was bad to shower after eating. It's like with swimming, you don't want to do it on a full stomach. So I just crawled into bed and called it a night. I am not the athletic type, so all that running around had worn me out quite a bit, and I had passed out almost instantly. The first incident occurred at 12 AM. I awoke to a loud rumbling noise, and in my confused state I couldn't discern where it was emanating from. I lazily stumbled around my dark minuscule bachelor pad. I felt around in the void like a blind man and kicked over a cluster of empty beer bottles in the process. I finally made my way to the living room where the stolen phone vibrated violently on the hard wooden surface of the coffee table. I immediately became sharply aware of the situation. A million thoughts cut through my drowsy state of mind, and I stood there not able to react at all. Out of fear, I decided not to pick up the phone. It vibrated for much longer than I would expect the normal settings would allow, but eventually it did die out. I checked the phone the next morning and saw that a voicemail had been left. I didn't have the same aversion to it as I had the call, which caught me by surprise because I swore I had turned the phone off prior to even arriving home. Foolishly, I played the message and without prompting me for a passcode it started. For a while it was just static, maybe 10 or 20 seconds of just white noise. I was expecting an angry voice and possibly a lot of profanity, but nothing. It was silent except for the noise. I could make out faint sounds of raindrops and a cracking thunder like boom, at a distance. Where was this person calling from? It was a local number as far as I could tell from the area code. But it didn't rain last night, and there certainly wasn't a thunderstorm either. More than a minute had passed and I was ready to hang up, but before I could tear the phone from my ear, a voice called out. It was a strained, raspy voice, like a chronic smoker or a really good blues singer. I couldn't make out the mumbles until suddenly the person shouted, "You're not John." It was so loud, it caused the speaker to crackle and pop. I flinched so hard the phone flew out of my hand. It crash-landed on my torn-up couch and bounced onto the floor with a solid thud. That surely would have ruined the phone's mint condition. With a great deal of anxiety, I crouched down and slowly caressed the phone with my fingers, and delicately raised it up into the sunlight. Luckily, the phone was perfectly fine and didn't suffer any visible damage. At that point, it stopped being about monetary gains. I just wanted to get rid of the phone. This thing had given me nothing but bad vibes ever since I got a hold of it. I made a few postings online for the phone and went out for a walk to calm my nerves. I placed the phone back on the table, making sure this time that the phone was actually turned off. The second incident occurred at 12 AM again that night. This time the phone rang instead of just vibrating. The ringtone was the generic stock iPhone one. It was a cheerful sounding series of short beeps initially, but as the volume escalated, the speaker started to distort under the stress. The once bubbly sounding tone became this harsh grating screech. Knowing this time around that it was indeed the phone, I resolved to ignore it, but the sound was so sharp and piercing. It felt as if someone was scraping the inside of my ear canal with a dental pick. I leapt from my bed mindlessly, tossing the covers over the other sides. The warm bottoms of my feet recoiled against the cold harsh floorboards. I shambled towards the now deafening sound radiating from the living room. I wondered how my neighbours remained so calm, since surely this would have aroused their attention as well. The phone was exactly where I had left it, face down on the coffee table. A thin sliver of light outlined the contour of the device. I flipped it over and like a flashbang the brightly illuminated screen blinded me. My eyes burned and I felt needle stabs from the front cortex of my brain all the way back to my brainstem. As I regained focus, I became more confused. There was no answer button on the interface. I swiped the screen aimlessly, trying to pick up, but nothing would happen. I made every gesture I could think of, but again, no reaction. The screen stayed completely static. I attempted to muffle the ringing for just a second so I could think clearly. With the meaty part of my palm forced up against the speaker, the sound changed pitch, but the staggering volume persisted. My heart raced as I searched for answers in my still sedated mind. The ceaseless ringing had gotten so frantic and loud it came across as one sustained, insufferable tone. I blinked my eyes as they started to water from the intense light of the screen. Something inside of me snapped, and I just gave into this flood of blind rage. I raised the phone far above my head, stretching out my arm and shoulder. I could feel the muscles flex and pull as I strained to get the phone as high as I could. I bent my knees and readied myself to fling this cursed device into the ground as hard as humanly possible. But before I reached that critical point, the room felt silent. I experienced for a split second a complete emptiness, like the air was sucked out of the room. It was as if I were floating in a vacuum chamber. My eyes and ears eventually adjusted to the sudden deprivation of sensory stimuli, and the ambient sounds of the night flood back into the room. My neighbour's creaky mattress, the side of the hallway light slipping in from underneath my front door, and the hum of the air vents all came back into focus. I remained standing there, as still as a statue, with the phone still raised above me. Once again I was gripped with fear as I contemplated who may have been calling me. Was this some sort of elaborate prank perpetrated by the smiling businessman? I felt exhausted from the ordeal, so I awkwardly lowered my now numb arm and examined the dead phone. I could see the faint reflection of Venetian blinds behind me as the room glowed through them. I tilted the phone and the smooth glass surface now mirrored my own faint silhouette back to me. Feeling my way around the back of the phone, I attempted to remove its back plate, hoping to release the battery. I didn't want to be interrupted again that night. The back was one seamless piece of metal, and didn't appear to open in any simple manner. I should have known better, but never having owned an iPhone, I didn't immediately remember that these things don't have removable batteries. I let out a desperate curse in my mind as I placed the phone on the couch and stacked a tower of cushions above it. At least then if it rang or vibrated, there would be something to dampen the noise. The first thing I did the next morning was check the postings I made. The night before I was ready to trash the phone and be done with it, but in the daylight and with a more rational mind I decided not to waste this opportunity. There was only one response, but it was perfect. The person wanted the phone immediately and for the asking price. Provided that the phone was in fact in the condition I had described, I corresponded back saying that we should meet up and I can show him just how mint condition the phone really was. He sent me back an address that was all the way across town. But being as desperate as I was, I didn't give it a second thought. I grabbed a couple of Pop-Tarts from the pantry and headed out with the phone in hand. I nibbled on my breakfast as I rode in the nearly empty subway train. It's always kind of quiet on a weekend morning. I gave the phone another examination to make sure it wasn't damaged from the previous night's incident. And that's when I saw the notification pop up. I had another voicemail. It was left at the same time as last night's voicemail. My heart sank and my mouth went dry, which almost made me choke on my Pop-Tarts. Crumbs came spewing out of my mouth as I coughed to clear my throat. I reached into my coat pocket and produced a set of earbuds. I cautiously plugged the jack into the receiver of the bottom of the device and inserted the earbuds into my ears, muffling the metallic screeches and clanks of the subway train. I braced myself for another noisy, static-filled message, but this time the man's voice came out crystal clear. "You're not John," the voice announced. Two thoughts shot through my head. Who's this John person? And is he talking to me or the smiling man who was the phone's previous owner? "Take me back to John," the voice demanded. The last statement kind of puzzled me even more. Was he referring to himself or the phone? "It's either him or you." The voice trailed off and the message ended. Pondering the cryptic recording, I stared out through the window in front of me, seeing only cement and graffiti on the other side. A sudden harsh ringing sound bursted forth from the earbuds, forcing me to rip them out of my ears. The shock sent me up out of my seat and alerted the few surrounding passengers around me. Feeling embarrassed, I awkwardly sat back down. The phone vibrated and I glanced down to see I had just received a message. It felt like the wind was knocked out of my chest as I saw that it wasn't a text but rather it was a photo. It was an image of me. It captured the very moment the ring caught me by surprise. My face was twisted in terror and my mouth agape. I had never seen myself so pale before, and there seemed to be a flush emanating from the phone that caused strange shadows to appear on my face. The photo appeared to have been taken from outside the train, which was impossible as we were travelling through a narrow tunnel and the camera couldn't have been far enough to get such a wide shot. My hands became cold and clammy as the blood rushed to my chest. I was having a panic attack. I looked around trying to see if anyone looked suspicious, but I couldn't make out their blurred faces and the cabin started to get darker. I could see the darkness growing from the corners of my eye. I dashed out of the train and bolted up the stairs, emerging by a park. A nearby bench became the site of my slow recovery. In through the nose and out through the mouth, I mumbled to myself under my breath. I never met up with the buyer that day. I was too scared and confused. Whoever it was who has been calling me knows who I am and has been stalking me this entire time. I couldn't spend another night with that thing in my possession, so I tossed it. On my way back to the apartment, I dropped it into a trash can on the side of the road. The third and final incident occurred the following night at 12 a.m. I was again awoken by the sound of an unfamiliar ringing tone. It took me a second to realise what was happening, as I was having the best sleep I've had for years. I launched out of bed and ran towards my living room, almost overshooting the coffee table where I'd been keeping the stolen phone. I looked down frantically, but soon remembered that I had already disposed of it. A blanket of serenity draped over me as I saw that the phone was indeed no longer there. I sighed a long sustained sigh of relief as I told myself that must have been one of my neighbour's phones. I crawled back into bed feeling safe and secure, wrapped in a cocoon of sheets, but the ringing persisted. I rose up in bed like a radio tower, trying to triangulate the source of the faint yet irritating sound. It seemed to have come from the north wall, so I banged on it with a quick, assertive rhythm. When the banging wasn't enough, I followed it with yelling, but again no response or action on their end. The sound now appeared to be coming from the east wall, so I hustled over to the other end of the apartment and started pounding on that wall and shouting. The more aggravated I grew, the louder and more frantic the ringing became. At the height of it, I was bouncing off the walls like a pinball. My psychotic rampage came to a halt when finally someone came knocking on my door. Before I could even open the door, I could hear them cursing and yelling at me to quiet down and go to sleep. They must have heard me unlatching the door and working the locks because they started calling me names and saying I was a lunatic. The door swung open to reveal a tall and slender lady dressed in a long nightgown. I cut her off before she could call me another rude name. My attempt to explain the situation left her with a dazed and even more angry look on her face. "There's no phone ringing," she hissed at me. That set me off and I raced down the hall and jumped down a whole flight of stairs. I lived on the 4th floor, so it didn't take me long to get the rest of the way down. Standing outside the building under a lit lamppost, I still find myself haunted by the horrible ringing. I must have looked like a crazed maniac as I made my way down the street in my boxers. I cocked my head around every few seconds, trying to see if the sound was getting louder or quieter. I couldn't make up my mind. I spun around and I stumbled past homeless people who seemed more afraid of me than most people usually are of them. Unknowingly, I had made my way back to the site where I disposed the phone. I scanned my surroundings and zeroed in on the trash can I had dumped the phone in. I dashed towards it, tackling it over and causing a huge metallic bang that echoed through the empty street. Plunging my arm into the innards of the receptacle, I dug around sharp metal cans and broken bottles. The sludgy remains of rotten food pooled around my shoulder, but it didn't even register in my mind at the time. I was at ground zero and the ringing reflected it. The noise was so dense it felt as if I was in a tiny box and not an open street. It was unmistakable when I finally got hold of the phone. Its cool glass face and its smooth aluminium body. I retracted my arm so violently that a trail of debris came gushing out. The phone shined brightly as it sat nestled in the palm of my hand. I picked up the call and on the other side the voice appeared. "You're not John," the entity claimed and swiftly hung up. I called it back but a recording stated that the line was no longer in use. My brain then felt like it was sitting in an active blender. A part of me wanted to just collapse there and be done with it, but I opted to return the phone instead. I looked for the phone and found a GPS app that had a home location. I wasn't sure how far I had walked or why I didn't take a bus. It seemed like I was in a trance, and even though my calves burned and the bottom of my feet were bloody and blistered, I walked on. The sun was beginning to creep over the horizon as I approached the house. It was a suburban mansion, or at least compared to my diminutive shoebox of an apartment. I didn't know what would be waiting for me inside and I didn't want to face them looking the way that I did. So I dropped the phone in the mailbox and took off. I slept for the rest of the day and awoke just in time to catch 12 a.m. I waited for the ringing to start up again, but it never came. By 12:30 a.m. I was laughing out loud and dancing around the apartment, knocking things over and not caring at all. I sat down at the dinner table with a beer in hand and revelled at the thought of being free. I started to wonder though, what had really transpired over these few days? Was the phone possessed? Was this all an elaborate prank? I toyed with the idea of seeing myself as the next viral sensation. The article title would probably read, "Idiot Thief Returns Haunted Phone." I couldn't help but also consider the slim possibility that the phone was indeed supernatural, and what would have become of the smiling man now that he had it back. I caught my reflection in the window, and I had a smile on my face like his too. I've never been this relieved in my life. Could this be a sign from God that I should reform and do something meaningful with my life? Maybe he was an angel sent to teach me a lesson and to give me a second chance. The next morning I decided that this was the first day of my new life, and Pop-Tarts would not suffice. I made my way down to a local diner just around the block. I found a booth in the corner, sat down and ordered eggs, bacon, toast and coffee. Now that's the breakfast a professional working man eats. I settled into the warm, bountiful meal and listened to the morning news blaring in the background. The reporter's voice was a little shaky as she reported last night. John Anderson, a wealthy real estate investor, murdered his wife and 2 young children. The name perked my interest, so I began to focus in on the report. The alleged cause of the incident was linked to a series of affairs that John was having, and that his wife discovered evidence of on his cell phone, which miraculously she found in their mailbox the morning previous. In John's statement, he claims that he lost control after his wife confronted him with photos she found on his supposedly stolen phone. In a blind rage, he pulled a gun on her. The neighbors awoke to the sound of gunshots at around 12 a.m. and called the police, but by the time they had arrived, John had already taken the lives of all 3 members of his family. I dropped a cup of hot coffee in my hand, spilling it onto the table and my lap. I was afraid to look, but I eventually summoned the strength to turn my head and peek at the news report. There on the screen was a mugshot of the smiling man.